talk about brake tools, the common brake tools that you guys are going to probably have in your box or you'll come across. So I wanted to just explain some of the stuff you should have or should be using. First thing we're going to talk about is the specifications for brakes. So they make these brake books that cover all the different manufacturers with different combinations of brake setups. Obviously this one only goes up to 2009. I haven't updated it since then, but I'm sure they have a current one out. The other place that you could go for specifications is MotoLogic and On Demand, places like that's where you're going to get your brake specifications. For the brake specs, you're going to have specifications not only for minimum thickness for rotors, the minimum out of roundness or the run out that's allowed for that vehicle. With drum brakes, you'll have the maximum diameter of drums. It'll also give you some torque specifications. Torque specifications for the bolts for the calipers. It will also give you wheel lug nut specifications. It's real good to have. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is just regular hand tools. So obviously you're going to need normal hand tools like dikes, wrenches and sockets and things like that. Every technician is going to have that. So you're obviously going to need that. The next thing you're going to have is the micrometers. So here I have a couple different types of micrometers. This is my micrometer. I've used this for like 20 years. It's a digital micrometer. It works really well when it has new batteries. It's real easy to use. Again, notice that it has a large frame and it has a point on the end so that we can get into the scoring of the rotor to get a minimum measurement. This is the one the school bought. This is actually came from Harbor Freight, so pretty cheap. I think they're like 20 bucks. And again, large frame, and it's got the point on the end, and this is digital as well. Real useful tool to have. The next thing I want to show you guys is the drum micrometer. So remember the drums are measuring to the outside. So here's my drum mic, and you can see that I can read it in millimeters or I can read it in 30 seconds. On the edge, you can see I have points, again, so that it can fit inside the scoring of a drum and get a maximum diameter. I'm going to take my mic, drop it inside, and then we go to the as wide as it can. I can lock it into place. Take it out, and then I can actually read the measurement that it took, and then compare that to specification. So again, it's a good tool to have. I can honestly tell you in the industry, I didn't use it a whole lot. Most of the time we're replacing the drums. So if you don't want to spend, I think I spent like, it was like 200 and something bucks. So if you don't want to spend that money, I don't blame you. But it's nice to have. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is the dial indicator. And there's a couple different styles. You can get this dial indicator that clamps on with the vice grip, or you could get the one with the magnetic base. Either will work just fine. The one with the vice grip actually I find is more useful. And when you're setting it up, you want to make sure that your vice grip goes onto a piece of the vehicle that is not going to move. And then once you lock it into place, then you can go ahead and you can adjust your neck here until it's tight, get the angle you need, and then down here at the bottom, you flip that switch, and that's going to tighten it up so it doesn't go anywhere. Now it doesn't move. Now you can go ahead and you can read how many thousandths of an inch your rotor or whatever you're measuring is coming out of run out. The dial indicator, I have a video that you guys are going to watch that talks a little more about it, and that actually is set up, so make sure you guys watch it. The next tool I want to show you that you guys may not think you'll need in brakes, but you will, is the digital multimeter. This is for diagnosing wheel speed sensors. It's a real quick test I can do. Usually I go to the sensor, I'll put it on ohms, and I'll take an ohms reading of the actual sensor to see if it's shorted out or not. From there, I can actually take a DC voltage reading. On a multimeter, it's probably going to fluctuate so fast that I'm not going to get a good reading. I'll probably switch and go to a scope and put it on a scope so I can actually watch the graph to see how well the wheel speed is actually detecting. So here's our axle nut set, and you can see most of the axle nuts are hexagon. Some of the axle nuts or some of your axle sockets are not going to be the hexal. They'll have more sides to it, so you can see the difference between the two sockets. Make sure you're using the right socket on the right nut, because if you use the wrong one, it's going to strip these out and they're going to be useless. Remember that these axle nuts can get quite large, and you want to make sure that you're using the appropriate sockets. Alright, so next is the bearing packer. So these are to pack the bearings down. You can see that I have an actual bearing here, and this is a real simple tool. Instead of packing it by hand, like I showed you guys, you could put it into here. You're going to run this all the way down until it's tight. And then if you notice on the end here, there's a Zerk fitting. I'll put my grease gun on there and start greasing it up, and it will pump grease into the bearing, and voila, I'm all set. My bearing has been greased. That's a real good, easy tool to have. They also have one that you can set up kind of like this, but instead of pumping grease, I actually push down on the cup and it forces grease in. There's a couple different styles out there. The next thing we have is the bearing race driver. I think you guys have all used this before. If you guys haven't, I'll show you guys again. So if you guys remember that when we replace the bearings, you also got to replace the race because they're a match set. The race has to be punched out, and once we punch it out, we can get a new race. The new race will go into this adapter, and then I can put this shaft on. And now I can drive the race with a hammer down into place. Make sure that you guys use a race driver. If you guys use just a punch and try to go around, you'll probably end up messing up the race, its ovality. There won't be a perfect circle anymore. So make sure you guys use a driver when you're putting him into place. So the next thing we have is the brake parts washer. The brakes parts washer is for washing all that brake dust down. Remember that we can't use a air hose or anything because that brake dust will get into the air. It contains asbestos, which we'll breathe into our lungs, or people around us will bring it into their lungs, and OSHA will have a problem with that. So this is meant to slide, and it will roll right under your brake assembly when you have it up on the lift. I'll plug it into the wall and then turn it on, and then we'll put a parts washing solution out, and it comes with a little brush, and I can brush the drums and all the brake components down, and it all drains back into this container so it's safely be disposed of. Next thing we got is some of the rear brake shoe tools. You can see that we have some tools for the removing and installing the rear springs. They come with little spoons here. You can see on the end here, it's got a little claw, and this would be for putting on a spring. You can see on this side, this is for actually getting up under the spring and removing it. So this is installing side, this is removing side. And then this is an actual claw to help stretch a spring and try to get it over into place. These come in different sizes. This is probably for light vehicles. This one's probably for medium-sized vehicles. And then this one's probably for heavy vehicles. notice that they change in size. The pins or the backing springs that hold the shoes to the actual backing plate, this is the tool to remove them. It goes over the actual spring. I can rotate it, take it off the pin, and it comes right off. This is called a brake spoon. This is used for coming behind the backing plate to the star adjuster so that I could turn the star adjuster and start adjusting the brakes out. You'll notice on the back of the backing plates, they'll have little windows that this brake spoon can fit into. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you for the rear drums is this tool here. This tool is to help you, after you install the shoes, is to get the shoes adjusted to the correct size for the drum itself. So what I'll do is I'll take a measurement of the drum on the inside using the points, and if I go to the other side, this is where the shoes should be adjusted out to. So I'll adjust the shoes till it'll come out to meet this end, and that will be the exact size of the drum. So when I go to put the drum on, it slides right on. You guys will see that later. There's a Racepestis that does a video using this tool, so you guys get to see that in action. And when I go to do my rear drum video, I'll make sure that I use this and show you guys how to correctly use it. The next thing I want to show you guys is the rear disc brake or disc caliper brake tool. I showed you guys, or you guys will see this on when I go to install the MR2 calipers. I have to use this tool to receive the pistons back in. So if you guys, they come with all different types of adapters. You see here, there's a bunch of different types of adapters, different sizes. You find the one that is for the correct size for the piston. It goes on the end of your tool here, like so. And then I'll insert this onto the piston and then adjust this nut out to this plate hits against the backing plate of the caliper so that I can rotate the piston and recede it back into the caliper. You guys will see a demo of me doing that when I go to install the MR2 rear brake calipers. So this is a universal brake caliper toolkit. Useful tool to have. With the calipers, on the front calipers, there's a couple different tools to receive the pistons in them. One of them is this. So this would go inside the caliper, and as I actuate it, this will come out and this will push against the pistons, which will force the pistons back into the caliper. This is actually set up for a dual piston caliper. That's why this is so long and it has two poles. It's for a dual piston caliper setup. You can do it the old-fashioned way with the C-clamp. You'll see in the Racepestis video, when they go to recede a caliper, they use the old C-clamp. And basically all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this on the outside of the caliper, and this side is gonna go to the actual piston. And as I rotate that in, it's gonna push the pistons in. Things I forgot to tell you about was the go, no-go gauge. And this is for measuring brake pads. So this gauge actually has these colored discs here. And each one is a different size. So you can see that this is 12 millimeters, this is 10 millimeters, this is 8 millimeters, this is 6 millimeters. That's 5, 4, 3, and 2 millimeters down here at the end. And they've colored them so people that don't understand the specifications should just go by the color. So green meaning good, yellow meaning caution, and red meaning no good or stop. Stop using that pad. These are real easy to use. You can stick them in there, stick them inside next to the pad, and basically I'm just going to see if the pad lines up with the go, no-go gauge. Is talking about the lines and stuff. So every line has a fitting on it. When we go to remove those fittings, you want to use a flare wrench. Don't use open end wrenches, just the open end, because that's going to end up stripping the fitting. You want to make sure that you're using a flare nut. This is a flare nut wrench. Make sure you use the right size. Some are metric, some are standard. Depends on what you're working on. So know the difference between metric and standard sizes. The other thing I want to show you is for the bleeders. There's some special wrenches out for bleeders that have curves or bends in it to make it easier to get to. So you can see here, this is a bleeder wrench, and you can see it has different sizes, and also it's got different curves for getting into those tight places. This is another one. And this is another good one. So these are bleeder wrenches. It's not a must-have, but it's nice to have these. So you can probably pick them up pretty cheap. All right, the next thing I want to show you guys is the line bender, this is one of the line benders right here. So you can see I would adjust this down. Okay, I can run my line in, right? And depending on where in the line I want to have it bent, I would line the middle of the bend up with the middle of this shaft, okay? And then once I got it where I needed to, I would go ahead and tighten this down. And as I tighten this down, this is going to come up, and you can see that the line is going to lay right in there, and it's got a nice curve to it. And the farther I go up, the more it's going to bend it. And I would bend it to whatever angle I need it to be bent at. And that's a real good tool to have. If you try to bend them by hand, it doesn't give that nice arc. They tend to fold. And if they fold, it's going to cause a restriction. You want to make sure you have a nice, good arc to it on that bend. The next thing I'll show you guys is after you, when you're making a line, you're probably going to have to make the flare for the end of the tool. I've already showed you guys a video of how to make a flare. This is the actual toolkit, and it comes with all of the attachments you need for your standard and your metric brake lines. And then this is your line holder, so this will hold it in place. This is actually to make the single flare, and then this is to deburr it. Okay, so the next thing I'll show you guys is the brake fluid tester. And you can use test strips, or you could buy one of these electronic testers. And again, we're only measuring, this measures the resistance in the brake fluid. The more water it has, because water conducts electricity, the less resistive, the more water that it contains. So I would dip this into the brake fluid and press the top button, and it would take a reading. So because it's not touching anything right now, I'm seeing 0%. But if I touch, let's say, the table or the vice grip here, the vice grip's made out of metal, and because metal conducts electricity very well, you can see that I have above 4%. So all it's doing is measuring the conductivity of the brake fluid. The more water that is inside of it, the more it's going to conduct electricity, the higher the reading you're going to get. Anything up to 2% is okay. Anything higher than 2%, the fluid needs to be replaced. If you find that the brake fluid needs to be flushed out, there's a couple different ways to do it. This is a pressure bleeder. So I would open this up. I would fill this container with fresh new brake fluid. I can put this back on, tighten it down, and then I can pump up this reservoir full of pressure, and then it's going to force the brake fluid out of this tube, and you can see on the end here, I have an adapter that goes onto the master cylinder. It's designed like a cap, so I can screw it onto the master cylinder, and it's going to push that brake fluid in to the master cylinder. And all I got to do is walk down to the bleeders and open up the bleeders, and it's going to push the fluid through the system until I have nice, fresh, new fluid throughout the entire system. So that's a real easy way to do a brake flush all by yourself. There's another way you can do it using a vacuum or a sucker. So this is the one from the shop. And we would go ahead and hook up this line. I would put this over the bleeder valve and then plug in shop air, turn it on, and it would cause a suction, and it will pull all the brake fluid out of the system and into this tank. The only thing I have to do is just constantly monitor the master cylinder to make sure that I'm keeping the master cylinder full of new brake fluid. The last thing I have here is the bench bleeding kit. I showed you guys Ray Bestis showed you guys how to bench bleed. It was one of the videos I assigned. And if you remember, they went into the master cylinder, they screwed these little fittings in into the master cylinder. You see them there? And then once they're screwed into the master cylinder, I could go ahead and I could put these lines onto the end. And once I got the line on the end, let me get one that fits. Once I got the line onto the end, I would take that tube and it will return back into the reservoir of the master cylinder. Now every time I pump the fluid, it's going to come out the fitting, through the hose, and then back into the reservoir. And I do that until all of the air is out. Again, that's a video by Ray Bestis that I've signed for you guys, so make sure you guys watch that. Okay, there's some other things that are not really tool related. There's chemicals, obviously brake clean is one of them. There's the brake lube that's specially designed for the heat of the brakes. Make sure that if you guys are lubing the brakes that you're using actual brake lube and not any other type of lube, because it will crystallize and then it will end up failing on you. I always keep a sanding cookie. This is real good for cleaning rust out of the hubs of the rotors. It's also good for resurfacing or giving a non-directional cut after machining your rotors. When we go to machine rotors, I'll show you what a non-directional cut is. So you probably want to have one of these along with appropriate cookies. And that's it. So that's the basic tools that you're probably going to need. There are obviously tool manufacturers are coming out with more and more tools every year. So there's plenty on the market, but if you had just this stuff, you'll be able to do anything with brakes. In my next video, we're actually going to go back to the MR2 and we're going to do the caliper.